Hi, this is Rob Drummond at the Confusion Clinic. Today's video is going to look at the thorny issue of planning in Infusionsoft. So one of the reasons that your Infusionsoft app ends up in a bit of a mess is usually because of a lack of planning or ineffective planning and not being sure about what you need to work on and how you need to structure things. And you end up a bit like the chap down here with lots going on, lines going everywhere, but it isn't always clear what you need to do next and what is the most important thing for you to focus on right now. I think Infusionsoft planning questions really fall into three brackets. The first question that I see people asking is, how should I plan out my campaigns? So different people will tell you different things about this. Some people will tell you that you need to get out a whiteboard and meticulously map out every sequence and every goal that you're going to have. Some people will tell you to use swim lanes and map out the interactions between humans and automation. Some people will tell you just to open Infusionsoft and start building. I think the answer really is whatever works for you. I'm going to show you in a minute my process for planning out my campaigns, and I think you might find it helpful. The second planning question I see people asking is, how many campaigns do I need? This comes back to the age-old question of, should you be doing everything from a single Infusionsoft campaign that gets really complicated, or should you create multiple campaigns that just do one particular thing? Increasingly, more and more, I'm setting up more campaigns and trying to do less in those campaigns, mostly because it makes it a lot easier to understand, easier to follow, but it also makes it easier to diagnose when things go wrong. The third planning question that I see people asking then is, what campaigns should you work on first? And this really comes down to identifying the bottlenecks in your business, because there is always a bottleneck, there are always constraints. What we need to do at the moment is identify what those constraints are, because those are the campaigns that you need to work on first in Infusionsoft. My preferred way to plan out campaigns in Infusionsoft is actually to use the campaign builder. But I don't use a campaign builder in the context of just starting to build campaigns. I think that what you need to do is you need to have an overall plan of how everything is going to fit together for you first. You could equally do this on a whiteboard. The thing about a whiteboard is that people tend to rub it off after a while. I think it's a little bit transient. You also might not have a whiteboard handy. I do not have a whiteboard handy, whereas using the campaign builder is in my opinion, a more permanent way of doing it, so you can share it with people who also have access to Infusionsoft. So this is something that I have found quite helpful. So I will go into the campaign builder and I'll set up a campaign. So in this case I've called it planning example. So I think you want to make it quite clear to the people using your Infusionsoft app that this is a planning only campaign. We're not going to publish this campaign, we're not going to push any contacts through it, and it doesn't actually matter what these goal types actually are, because I'm only using this to map out what goals we should be monitoring in Infusionsoft and what response we need to make to those goals. Because then once we've mapped all this out, we can then think about, okay, so how do we want to break this down? How many campaigns are we going to need? What should go in those campaigns? So as an example here, I've worked through an example. So in this situation, we're saying, for example, that there are probably three ways that people could get in contact with us. So maybe there's an inbound phone call, maybe we meet people at local networking meetings, or maybe someone can come to the website, maybe from Google AdWords or Facebook ads, and they make a web inquiry on the website. In each of those situations, we probably have a specific response. So maybe if they make a web inquiry, we send them an acknowledgement of the fact that we have received their details and someone will be in touch. If we met them at a networking meeting, maybe we scan in their business card into the Snap app, which adds them into Infusionsoft, and maybe that triggers a campaign which basically just says, great to meet you, it's really nice to meet you today, please add me on LinkedIn, this is my LinkedIn handle. If the inquiry came from an inbound phone call, maybe we have a similar campaign that basically says, thanks for calling, here are our details, and perhaps that even sets up a task for someone just to follow up on the phone call, because maybe depending on the nature of the inbound call, maybe we said that we would send them something in the post, or maybe we said we would send something to them through email, so maybe we send them some relevant product information, for example. So each of these, I think, so in terms of thinking about how you're going to structure your campaigns, I would potentially have each of these as their own campaign. So this would be almost like your first type of campaign. So these are the campaigns that respond to an initial inquiry. From here, what we're going to do is, I think from here we're going to add people to an introduction sequence. And this introduction sequence is going to explain more about who we are, what we stand for, why the company exists, who we serve, who we don't serve. Frequently recently I've seen this called an indoctrination series, which I think is a little bit of a Ryan Dice term, but you know, terminology is terminology. What we're talking about is introducing who you are, what you stand for. So maybe we do that. Maybe at the end of that sequence, if they haven't already instigated a sales conversation with us by then perhaps we send them to a series where we take on Ryan Levesque's pivot survey approach and we send them a survey and we ask them, who are you, what are you interested in, and where would you like to go next? So perhaps one of the questions on our pivot survey is, do you trade business to business and business to consumer, or just business to consumer? So maybe that is then going to segment which ways we send them and which campaigns we send a contact to after that. So for example, if a contact tells us that they trade either B2B and B2C or just B2B, then perhaps we start a campaign which invites them to our monthly webinar series. So this could be a rolling campaign that maybe runs on a monthly basis, or maybe you're using something like Stealth Seminar to invite them to an automated webinar even. And then the goal from that obviously is that they book onto the webinar, and perhaps then we have separate campaigns for whether they show up to the webinar or whether they don't show up to the webinar. So this is actually quite useful now, because what we can start to think about is, do we want to have this, for example, as a single campaign? So there are different ways of doing it from here. So maybe everyone who is booked on the webinar gets added to a webinar campaign, and maybe your webinar campaign deals with all of this part of the process. So it depends a little bit on how granular you want your campaign structure to end up looking. Equally, you could also have separate campaigns for your people who show up, a different campaign for the people who don't show, and in that campaign you offer them a limited time replay. Maybe the monthly webinar is only available for a week, and then beyond that they have to wait until next month's webinar. And the outcome of your webinar could be that they instigate a sales meeting. So in that situation, perhaps we open an opportunity, maybe we start the sales pipeline. So the sales pipeline will probably be a separate campaign, and the sales pipeline is going to make sure that the leaders progress through the opportunity stages that we have set up in Infusionsoft. Perhaps the end goal after that is a high ticket offline sale. If they go ahead and purchase that, then maybe we send them to a campaign where we deal with customer onboarding, maybe we ask for referrals, that sort of thing. If they tell us that they trade B2C, then perhaps we deal slightly differently. Perhaps we offer them a B2C product which is bought online, and again, if they buy that product, perhaps we send them to a product consumption campaign to make sure they're actually using the product that they've just bought. Maybe we offer them various upsells. Perhaps we ask them for a referral. Perhaps we ask them to join our referral partner program. So this is only an example, and I've only really just started to map this out. But what you could do with this is use it as a framework and decide that, okay, so we've got people coming in to our world in here, and you might then decide to have one campaign to deal with all the initial responses. Or you might decide to have a campaign for each type of response, in which case these sequences here would effectively become your campaign. So you'd have a campaign to respond to someone who's made an inbound phone call, you'd have a campaign to deal with someone that you met at a networking meeting, you'd have a campaign to deal with someone who made a web inquiry. This is increasingly my approach. I am increasingly breaking down my campaigns into people who have done a specific action, and the goal of the campaign is to get them to take a subsequent action. So in this case, I am really hoping that I can get to learn more about them, so I can then invite them to my webinar sequence, or I can send them to the B2C product sequence. So I thought I'd share this because I find this a really helpful way to think through the whole process and think about what campaigns I'm going to need. Because what you can do from here is, based on your knowledge of where the bottlenecks are in your business, you can really pick out campaigns that you need to focus on first. So maybe, for example, you're getting loads and loads of inquiries coming in. Maybe you're inundated with inquiries, but you just can't convert those inquiries to customers. And maybe, for example, you're adding inquiries to your database, you're sending them to your introduction sequence, but maybe you aren't getting them to respond to you after that. So maybe this is the campaign that you need to go and work on next. It could also be, for example, that perhaps once people are in Infusionsoft and once you're marketing to them and sending stuff to them on a regular basis, that your sales conversion rates are actually quite good. But maybe your problems lie in the start of the process. So maybe you're not getting enough people into Infusionsoft, and then maybe you need to go and look at your traffic generation. Maybe you need to go and look at your AdWords campaigns. And this is really a way then of picking out particular parts of the process that you're going to decide are bottlenecks, and you're going to work on those campaigns first because they're going to deliver the biggest impact to your business. If you have an alternative way of planning out your campaigns, I'd really like to hear it. You can leave a comment below this video or go to www.confusionclinic.com/videos.